It was late in the evening, and the park ranger's shift had just begun. The desert air was thick with the remnants of the day's heat, but the night had a strange, unnatural chill to it. The darkness was absolute, a blanket that seemed to swallow the road ahead. Out here in Tuba City, Arizona, there was nothing for miles, just the vast, empty expanse of the desert stretching out in all directions. The ranger had worked this beat for years, his job to patrol the desolate stretches of land, ensuring the safety of the few who dared to venture out here. His headlights cut through the thick night, casting a ghostly light over the rough, winding roads. He was used to the quiet, but tonight the stillness felt different. There was an undercurrent of unease, a sensation he couldn't quite shake. He flicked the radio on, the crackling of the static filling the silence. There were no updates, just routine, but still, something gnawed at him. It was a feeling he couldn't quite shake, but it was there, tugging at the back of his mind as he continued his patrol. The road twisted ahead, the familiar path he'd driven countless times. He knew every bump and curve, every dark corner. That's when he saw it. A figure, far in the distance, moving down the middle of the road. At first, it seemed like a person, someone walking, maybe stranded or lost. The ranger slowed, instinctively preparing to offer help. He leaned forward, trying to make out any details in the dim light. But the figure didn't respond. It didn't even seem to acknowledge the truck. It just kept moving, its pace steady and unfaltering. "Hey," the ranger called out, rolling down his window. His voice broke the silence, cutting through the stillness of the desert. "You need help?" There was no answer. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel as he walked toward the figure. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on the person ahead. At first, it seemed normal, just someone walking down the road, their back turned toward him. But as he got closer, he noticed something off about the way they moved. The figure didn't walk like a person. It was stiff, jerky, and unnatural. Each step seemed forced, as if it wasn't quite comfortable in its own skin. The way the figure swayed, twisted, it just didn't look human. The ranger's gut twisted, a cold shiver running down his spine. Something wasn't right. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier, pressing in on him as he approached. "Are you all right?" he asked again, his voice laced with concern and growing unease. Still no answer. Then, without warning, the figure suddenly stopped, its body jerking unnaturally, as if it had been waiting for something. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, the figure turned around, its head snapping in an impossible motion, the neck stretching in an inhuman way. The ranger froze. The face that looked back at him wasn't human. It was a grotesque mask of skin, its eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on him with an unsettling intensity. There was no expression, no emotion, just a cold, empty stare. And then the figure moved. It wasn't a casual shift or a simple step. It lunged forward at an impossible speed, darting off into the darkness with the speed that no human could achieve. The ranger's heart raced, his body frozen in place as he watched the shape disappear into the shadows. His mind screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. The air around him felt electric, charged with a strange energy. His breath came in shallow gasps as he fumbled for his flashlight, pointing it in every direction. He was alone, the vast desert surrounding him in all directions, and yet it felt as though something was closing in. He heard it before he saw it. A low, guttural growl. It was a deep sound vibrating in his chest, and it came from somewhere close by. Too close. He turned the beam of the flashlight, sweeping over the ground. The gravel crunching beneath his boots. There, in the distance, the figure reappeared. But this time it was different. The figure was no longer walking. It was crouched low to the ground, its body contorted in an unnatural way. The shape had shifted again, its form now resembling a large, twisted coyote. But it wasn't just any animal. The eyes, those eyes, they were human. The pupils gleamed in the flashlight's beam. It gleamed with an unsettling, knowing intelligence. For a moment, the ranger stood there, frozen, staring into those eyes. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. He had heard the stories, heard the warnings from the locals about skinwalkers, shapeshifters who could take on any form of any creature, any person. But he hadn't believed them, not really. Not until now. The creature growled again, the sound echoing through the still night air, a sound that sent a surge of terror through the ranger's body. It wasn't just an animal, and it wasn't just a person. It was something else, something dark, something ancient. And then, without warning, it lunged. The ranger snapped out of his stupor, his survival instincts kicking in. He turned and ran, his legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart thundering in his chest. He didn't dare look back, not even once. He reached the truck, scrambling inside, slamming the door shut. His hands shook as they turned the key, the engine roaring to life. He didn't wait. He floored the gas pedal, speeding down the road, not stopping until he had put miles between himself and whatever that thing was. But even as he drove, the image of those eyes burned into his mind. He knew what he had seen: a skinwalker, a shapeshifter. The stories weren't just tales to scare children. They were warnings. And the ranger, for the first time in his life, knew what actual fear felt like. Growing up in Arizona, I was steeped in the land's myths and legends. Native traditions, strange vortexes, UFO sightings, and countless stories of the unknown surrounded me. They fascinated me from an early age. I spent much of my time wandering the desert and mountains, hunting, camping, exploring the vast wilderness. It became my second home, and I felt as though I truly belonged there, deep in the heart of the Arizona wild. One late spring day, I ventured out on one of my many trips. I had a habit of straying off the beaten path, and after hours of aimlessly wandering, I stumbled upon a small cluster of old mud adobe houses. The air was still, the sun hanging low in the sky, and as I approached, a few figures emerged from the doorways, eyeing me curiously. After a brief exchange between them, they seemed to agree that I wasn't a threat. One of the elders, an older man dressed in traditional Navajo clothing and a headdress, approached me slowly. His gaze was steady yet kind, as he asked if I was lost or in need of assistance. "I'm not lost," I told him, "but I am intentionally wandering." He chuckled softly, his deep voice a sound of ancient wisdom, and invited me to join him for a meal with his family. What followed was one of the most surreal and memorable experiences of my life. The time spent with him felt like stepping back in time. We shared stories around the fire, swapping tales of family, history, and life in the wild. As the evening unfolded, more members from the surrounding houses joined us, and I quickly sensed that they didn't often have outside visitors. Their hospitality was generous, and the longer we spoke, the more their stories took an eerie quality. full of ancient secrets. However, there was one man who didn't speak a word. He just sat quietly, watching me with an intensity that unsettled me. During our conversation, I mentioned my annual walkabouts, long solo hikes into the wilderness that I took every September. The silence of the elderly man suddenly broke. He stood and walked over to me, sitting at the circle's edge, and asked me to join him on the ground. He spoke slowly, almost reverently, recounting his own walkabouts from years past. He described a canyon he once ventured to, a place he called dangerous but magical, telling me that I would see the world differently if I returned. The weight of his words hung in the air, and I knew deep down that I would return to this place. Later, he invited me to his home, a small weathered structure. The door to the back room stood slightly ajar, and inside, I glimpsed animal pelts, mostly coyotes and wolves, draped across the walls. Without saying a word, the man closed the door, picked up an old map, and handed it to me, along with handwritten directions that seemed worn from years of use. He walked silently away, vanishing into the back room. That night, one of the families invited me to stay. I accepted it gratefully. The next morning, as I was preparing to leave, an old woman approached me. In her hands, she held something small, an object wrapped in cloth. She handed it to me with the quiet command, "Dip your bullets in the white ash at the hottest part of the fire." Then, without a word, she turned away. As the months passed, curiosity gnawed at me. But September came, and I packed up for my walkabout. As I was preparing, I found the talisman the woman had given me in the drawer. Something inside me told me to take it, so I packed it carefully into my gear and set off on the journey. The drive was long, the road marked on the old map overgrown and hard to find. By the time I reached the Forest Service Road, it was much later than I had anticipated, so I decided to camp and start my hike in the morning. The next day, after several hours of hiking on a forgotten trail, I came upon a narrow crack in the cliffs. There was a stream running through it, the water only waist deep, but too narrow for a kayak or a canoe. I hoisted my gear over my head and waded through, the cold water creeping up to my chest as I moved forward. The crack in the cliff stretched endlessly, and after what felt like hours, the canyon opened up into a hidden valley. A small lake sat in the middle, surrounded by tall rock faces. The place so remote it seemed no human had ever stepped foot there. No sign of civilization, no trash, no evidence of campfires, just pure, untouched wilderness. That night, the valley was eerily quiet. No birds, no frogs, no wind, nothing. The silence pressed against me like a weight. The next morning, I set out to explore the valley. Despite my previous experience with mountain lions, I felt at ease, even though I always keep my gun at my side when hiking. Hours pressed as I trekked, and eventually, I found a narrow path leading up the side of a cliff. It led to caves that seemed to invite me in. I entered one cautiously, calling out to make my presence known. The cave was vast, a single chamber that stretched back a couple hundred feet. My headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing no tracks except my own. But then, at the back of the cave, my light fell upon something that made my heart stop. A pile of bones. A mixture of animal and human, stacked carelessly together. Amid the bones was a small, ancient candle sitting on a natural stone shelf. It was old, the wax hardened and blackened. But it wasn't the candle that chilled me to my core. It was the realization that these bones were not from some distant past. They were recent. A cold dread swept over me, and I quickly turned to leave. As I exited the cave, my heart raced. The light of day offered little comfort. Standing just 75 feet away from me was the largest wolf I had ever seen. It was perched on a rock, watching me intently. Then it dropped to all fours, and without a sound, it just stared. I fired 2 shots into the air, hoping to scare it off, but it didn't flinch. Didn't even move. Wolves are known to flinch at the sound of gunshots, but this one didn't. After a moment, I turned, grabbed my binoculars, and looked back. But the wolf was gone. Vanished. I returned to camp with a heightened sense of unease. Night fell quickly in the canyon, and with that came the silence once more. As the sun disappeared, I saw a flicker of light coming from the area of the cave. Though it didn't make sense. It couldn't have been that candle. It had burned out long ago. I decided to investigate the next day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. At dawn, a strange haze lingered over the canyon floor, but it quickly dissipated with the rising sun. I gathered my things and headed back towards the cave. As I climbed higher, I stumbled upon another cave entrance, smaller than the first. A twisted juniper stood at the mouth, its branches adorned with strange objects, bones, old artifacts, and what looked like Native American relics. Something about it felt wrong, but curiosity pushed me forward, and I entered the cave. The walls were covered in ceremonial paintings, their vivid colors clashing with the dark shadows. The deeper I went, the colder it became. By the time I reached the back of the cave, I found an altar made of wood and bones. But the most disturbing sight was a small, pale figure sitting on the ledge high above me. Her face painted white, a crown of branches adorned with 2 small antlers. I stared at her for a few moments, convinced she was a long dead relic. But then I heard a faint voice, an ancient, unintelligible language. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. Panic seized me. I bolted from the cave, my headlamp flickering as I felt someone close behind me. The flicker of the light from the entrance pushed me forward, and as I neared the cave's mouth, I caught sight of the wolf again. This time it stood upright, looming over me, its gaze unblinking. Back to camp, packed my things up as quickly as I could, and set up a fire larger than usual, hoping the flames would keep whatever was out there at bay. That night, the wolf returned, walking towards me with a slow, deliberate gait. I fired, the shots hitting its body, but it didn't even notice. I emptied my magazine, my gun clicked empty, but the creature didn't stop. My hand shook as I fumbled for my backup ammo. As I reached into my bag, the talisman the woman had given me slipped from my pack. I clutched it, remembering her words. Dip your bullets in the white ash. I grabbed an arrow, dipped it into the ash from my fire, and shot. The arrow struck the wolf, and he let out a terrible scream, a sound like nothing I had ever heard. The creature spun and ran back into the trees. When he did, I saw the woman with the antler crown standing by the tree line, waiting for him. They both disappeared into the shadows, and for the rest of the night, I could hear the faint, otherworldly voice echoing from the depths of the canyon. Didn't sleep a wink. At dawn, I packed up and left the valley, knowing I would never return. The next spring, I returned to the Navajo reservation, wearing the talisman around my neck. The first person to greet me was the woman who had given it to me. She embraced me tightly and whispered, "You heard me." When I asked about the old man who had given me the map, they told me he vanished shortly after my visit, never to be seen again. I tried to tell them what had happened, but no one would let me. An old man in the corner muttered a word under his breath, one I had never heard before, Nodlushi. I later found out that meant Skinwalker in Navajo. I did try to tell them my story, but they wouldn't let me. They only nodded knowingly and refused to speak of it again. I visited the reservation a few more times over the years, but I never went back to the canyon. Curiosity still gnaws at me, but deep down, I know I can never go back to that place, to that hidden valley, where the line between the natural world and something far darker, blurred, beyond recognition. We live in Utah, and when my uncle was 19, he left on a mission. They sent him to an isolated Native American reservation in the Southwest. It was small, nestled on the edge of dense, dark woods that seemed to stretch forever, pressing in on every side like they were trying to reclaim land. His assigned companion was a guy fresh-faced and eager, but not ready for what they were walking into. From the moment they arrived, it was clear they weren't welcome. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. The locals wouldn't look them in the eye. Conversations were short, clipped, and filled with silent disapproval that neither of them could quite understand. The tribal council made it known they didn't want outsiders, especially missionaries, staying on sacred land. Eventually, a compromise was struck. They were allowed to stay, but only in a trailer stationed on the far outskirts of the reservation, just a few yards from the tree line. The woods loomed like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. That first night, as they settled into the rickety trailer, a strange unease took root. He told me it felt like they were being watched, like something out there already knew they didn't belong. Just after midnight, that unease turned into sheer terror. Without warning, the trailer began to shake violently. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an earthquake. It felt like something, or someone, was shoving the structure from both sides, rocking it like a toy. They hit the floor and scrambled beneath the bolted-down table, shielding themselves from what felt like an attack. The trailer groaned and creaked, metallic shearing echoing in the small space, as unseen forces pushed and pulled from opposite ends. For nearly 5 minutes, the assault continued. Then, silence. Absolute, unnatural silence. The next day, while making their rounds, one of them casually mentioned the incident to one of the families they visited. The reaction was immediate and chilling. The family fell silent, their faces drained of color. The father stood, looked him dead in the eye and said, "You need to leave." No explanation, no argument, just pure and raw fear. They exchanged confused glances, brushing it off as resentment toward their presence. They returned to the trailer that night, and the shaking began again. Just past midnight, like clockwork, the trailer rocked back and forth, harder this time. He said he could hear low growling outside, subtle, like something just barely holding back. He held his breath and listened. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't footsteps. It was pushing, like hands or claws scraping and forcing the trailer to tilt. Again, they hid beneath the table, paralyzed, and again, it stopped after a few minutes. It didn't stop the following night, or the night after that. Every time they brought it up to anyone, the result was the same. Fear, followed by silence, and what followed was a warning to leave. I was starting to believe the locals were behind it. Some kind of hazing or intimidation. My companion, on the other hand, was much less certain. Then came the turning point. We stopped at a small convenience store on the edge of town, just outside the reservation boundary. Frustrated, they spoke openly about the nightly disturbances and the refusal of the locals to help. The clerk, an older native man with sun-worn skin, overheard. He turned slowly and said, barely above a whisper, "They can't talk about it. It's forbidden." I paused and asked, "Can't talk about what?" The man's eyes darkened. "Skinwalkers," he said. "They're not just stories. They're real. They're evil. Witches, demons, twisted things that wear skins like masks. If you speak of them, They know, they listen, and they come for you. I laughed. Another scare tactic, just more superstition. But something about the man's voice, something about the way he avoided eye contact, it stuck with me. That night, when the shaking returned, I have had enough. I stormed to the trailer door, adrenaline drowning out my fear. He flung it open and shouted into the night, "Hey!" For a second, everything stopped. Then we saw them. 3 animals, 2 wolves, and a massive bear, lurking just at the edge of the tree line. But they weren't right. Their bodies were misshapen, too long in the limbs, and their eyes gleamed with something human. The moment they noticed they were being watched, the creatures stood up on 2 legs and walked. No, strode into the tree line. As they vanished into the darkness, they let out a sound that made my blood run cold. A laugh. Not an animal sound, not a snarl. A human laugh. High-pitched and very mocking. That was the last night we spent on the reservation. The next morning, they called their mission leader. No questions asked, they were relocated within hours. For a while, things returned to normal. A full year passed without incident. Then change came again. His companion was transferred to another area and was told he'd be getting a new one. They had to pick him up from the airport, about an hour's drive away. The route would take them through the outskirts of the reservation, the same cursed stretch of road that had haunted his memories. When they arrived at the airport around 8 p.m., the mission leader greeted the new companion, but before they left, he pulled him aside. "We're passing through dangerous territory tonight," he said sternly. "If you need to use the restroom, go now. We don't stop on that road. Not at night." The new guy, confused but dismissive, replied, "I'm fine." The leader's face darkened. His voice dropped. "No, I'm not joking. If you need to go, go now. You won't get another chance." The new companion laughed awkwardly, but stood firm. So they hit the road. About 30 minutes into the drive, just as they were surrounded by the dense woods near the reservation, the new companion started shifting uncomfortably. "I really gotta go," he muttered. And the mission leader's jaw clenched. "We don't stop here." "But I really can't hold it," he insisted. With a deep breath, the leader finally pulled over. The area was pitch black save for the car headlights slicing through the trees. He turned to him. "You go right next to the door. If I tell you to get in, you run." He nodded, but still not grasping the weight of the moment. He stepped out and began relieving himself alongside the car. 5 seconds passed. Without a word, the leader suddenly reached out and yanked him back inside, slamming the door shut, then floored the gas pedal. "What the hell?" he yelled. "What's going on?" No one answered. Everyone's eyes were glued to the passenger window, wide with fear. Something was running alongside the car. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a man. It was both. A tall, lupine figure, twisted and impossibly fast, was sprinting on 2 legs just feet from the car. Its yellow eyes glowed in the darkness. Its jaws were open in a manic grin. They were doing 60, then 70, lastly up to 80, but it kept pace for 10 full minutes. Then, without warning, it veered off into the trees, disappearing like it had never been there at all. No one spoke for the rest of the drive. When they finally arrived, pale and slightly shaken, the new companion stumbled out of the car and turned to the mission leader. What did I see?" The leader met his eyes, calm but deadly serious. "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your damn business."